Hi, and welcome to Sin's Voice. I'm Cindy, your host for tonight. I'm here to bring my passion for the dark and mysterious to life. Whether you love a good scary story or you're simply here for a thrill, all you need to do is dim the lights, get comfortable, and join me as we step into the shadows together. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe because you wouldn't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows. The Watcher by Letter Brilliant. The wind howled through the narrow streets as Sam made his way home, clutching his coat against the biting cold. He'd just finished his late night shift at the diner and was ready to collapse into bed. The town was nearly silent at this hour, with only a few streetlights casting pale pools of light over an empty sidewalk. But as he turned the corner, he saw something that made him stop. A figure stood under a flickering light street, facing away from him. It was tall and thin, almost unnaturally so, with arms that dangled a little too long. The figure was dressed into a worn, dark coat that looked like it had seen decades of use. Sam couldn't see the figure's face, but something about its stillness struck him as wrong, like it was waiting just for him. He took a step back, but the figure's head slowly tilted to the side, as if it had heard him. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like something mimicking human behavior, but not quite getting it right. Sam's heart pounded, and he tried to shake it off, the feeling of dread clawing up his spine. Hey, he called out, his voice trembling. Are are you okay? No answer. Instead, the figure turned around with a slow, deliberate movement. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he finally saw its face, or rather, the places where its face should have been. It was blank, like a mask with nothing underneath. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the streetlight. Sam stumbled back, horror sinking into his guts. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The figure tilted his head again, almost as if it were curious, and it took a step forward, its long limbs stretching unnaturally as it moved. In sheer panic, Sam finally broke free from his paralysis and turned to run. He sprinted down the empty streets, his foot echoing against the silence of the night. He didn't dare look back, but he could feel it following, its presence pressing down on him, cold and relentless. He dashed into his apartment building, slamming the door behind him and racing up the stairs to his room. Once inside, he locked the door, his hands shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to believe he was safe. He leaned against the wall, heart pounding, staring at the door as if expecting it to burst open. But everything was quiet, just the soft hum of his refrigerator, the ticking of his clock, the distant sounds of traffic. He sighed, letting his muscle relax. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe he just imagined the whole thing in his exhaustion. But as he looked down to the narrow hallway leading to his bedroom, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A faint shadow stretched along the floor, long and thin, itching its way around the corner. He stumbled backward as the shadow grew darker, and slowly the figure stepped into view, its blank face tilting with that same sickening curiosity. It moved forward, gliding, arms reaching out, fingers impossibly long, almost touching the wall on either side of the hallways. Sam scrambled into his bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. He heard soft footsteps in the hall, the slow, deliberate tap of shoes on the hard wood floor. The doorknob jiggled, and then there was a silence. He held his breath, straining to listen. Suddenly, he heard the faint sound of scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the door. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like something desperate to get inside. And then, without warning, it stopped. A moment passed, then another. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then a whisper, a low, breathy sound right next to his ear. "You looked at me." Sam wiped around, but there was nothing there. He backed against the wall, his chest heaving, and in the darkness of this room, he could barely make it out faint outlines of something standing in the corner. The figure, no longer under the streetlight, seemed almost to dissolve in the shadows, but he could still see that blank, empty face staring at him. "Why did you look at me?" It whispered again, closer this time, as if the words were pressing into his mind. He clamped his hand over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, but he could still hear it, that cold voice that seemed to slip into his mind like icy tendrils. It spoke again, the words growing louder, filling his thoughts until he couldn't hear anything else. When he opened his eyes, the figure was right in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint, shifting pattern under his skin, like something struggling to break free. And then everything went black. They found Sam the next morning sitting upright against the wall of his bedroom, his eyes wide open, staring into nothing. His face was frozen in a look of horror, mouth open in a silent scream. His heart had stopped, but there wasn't a single mark on him, except for a single faint scratch running down his cheek. And in the corner of the room, they found a shadow, one that didn't belong to anyone in the room, lingering there as if it was waiting for someone to look. Don't stay at your parents' house alone. From Sorry Draft 7183. I, 21 male, stumbled across here a couple of weeks ago and have been reading lots of posts. I thought I would share a story that happened about a year ago that has changed how I view living alone. At the time, I lived at my parents' house because the cost of living was so expensive. I was a university student working casual jobs and couldn't afford to move out. One day, my parent left to go on a business trip in France and decided to take a family vacation out of it. It was the middle of the exam period, so I couldn't go, but they took my four siblings. I was ecstatic, since I could have the whole house to myself. They left early Monday morning. I look forward to being the man of the house for the upcoming week. Everything was great until around 7 p.m. the next night. I was driving back home on a long, dimly lit road leading towards my street. Suddenly, I spotted a bald, shirtless man walking alongside the street carrying a shovel. Even though I saw him momentarily, his figure is etched in my brain. He was as pale as the moon, and his eyes were lifeless and empty. We live in a suburban area, far from any farmland. I couldn't imagine what someone would need a shovel for at this time of night. I kept driving, checking no one had followed me. I drove into the garage and closed the door. Of course, no one followed me, I chuckled to myself as I went about making dinner. By the next day, I had convinced myself that he might have just been lost or had dementia or something. Having 3 looming exams around the corner helped me forget about the man. I studied at home that day, which meant I got to practice a new prelude of piano, and I studied music theory. I studied hard, only to stop for food and the occasional YouTube videos until I noticed the time, 7:34 p.m. Damn it, I muttered as I realized I had forgot to bring my washing in. It would have to go in the dryer now. I grabbed a basket and went outside, soaking in the soft night sounds of crickets and rustle in the leaves. Suddenly, I heard movement down my driveway. Moving quietly, I attentively approached the end of the driveway, outlined by the perimeter of the bushes. Hey, who's there? I asked nervously. No answer. As I waited near the bushes, I braced myself for a shovel to come towards my face. There was only more rustles of the leaves, then silence. I stood there for what I felt like hours, waiting for someone to appear, but no one did. Returning to the clothesline, I grabbed the basket and went back inside, ensuring the door was locked behind me. It was now Wednesday, and I was more than just a bit nervous. I checked that every window door were locked several times before leaving for university. I couldn't focus in class. I was still thinking about the man I saw on Monday night. When I arrived home, I took out a packet of 2-minute noodles and watched Breaking Bad. We live in a bigger house, which unfortunately means it creaks a lot more on its own when no one is making any noise. The house is equipped with a motion detecting system, but I don't trust its accuracy, so I did laps throughout the house whenever I heard a creak that was a bit too loud. Every time I walked past the window out looking our backyard, I expected to see a pale face pushed up against the window looking inside. I wanted to call the police just to ask them to drive around my streets and see if anyone was lurking, but I felt embarrassed for getting so worked out over no physical evidence. I decided against calling the police and shortly went to bed, accompanied by nothing but the howling wind outside. It was now Thursday, which means another day of practicing at home. Having finished my practice around 8 p.m., I got to make myself a sandwich, and I gathered the cheese, ham, and lettuce for my sandwich. I paused to remember what I needed for school tomorrow. That's when I heard it. A singular, high pitched piano note echoed through the house. The blood drained from my face as I looked down the stairs of our home. I froze in fear, unable to move a muscle. Slowly, I turned and saw the motion detector panel. It consisted of 6 lights, one from each room a sensor was in. I saw the light from room number 2, which was where I was, and room 6, which was where the piano was. They were flashing. All I could do was watch as the light of the room 6 turned off and subsequently the light from room 5 began flashing. It was then I could hear running down the hallway. Grabbing the knife on the bench, I ran for one of the bedrooms and lay underneath the bed. I could hear someone running up the stairs as I lay there. Walking around the kitchen table, they tapped their fingers onto the bench. Holding my breath, I waited as he approaches the bedroom as I was hiding in. He entered the room, but all I could see were his legs. He stood there silently, peering into the closet, then turned and left. Now was my chance. I left the bedroom quietly, clutching at the knife. I crept down the stairs slowly. However, as I reached the bottom stairs, a soft creak left the floorboards. I ran towards the front door, reaching for the keys that hung next to it. I could hear him coming as I tried to unlock the door. Once I flung the door open, I ran towards the end of the driveway, screaming for help. The police were shortly called, but I couldn't find anyone in the house or in the nearby area. After giving the neighbors the description of the man I saw on Monday, I was told that the description sounded like someone who used to live a couple of streets away. However, he had gone missing since 6 months ago. For the rest of the week, police patrolled by my street for the next few days, but didn't find anything. But to this day, the image of the man walking down my street is permanently stuck in my head. I've since moved out into my own place, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't check the house carefully every time I come home late at night. McDonald's VHS by spoopychillz. When you think of McDonald's, chances are that you have fond memories. Whether it be the old commercials with Ronald, Grimace, and all their friends, or immersing yourself in childhood whimsy at the small team playground outside your local McDonald's. Many associate McDonald's with fun. Yeah, that's what I originally thought too. The year was 2005. I had just come back from working my shift at the police station. Nothing overly eventful had happened, save for the occasional cat stuck in the tree or whatever. Nothing much really event happened in my town at all, apart from one random missing children incident years before. I say children, but that's relative. They were in their early adulthood and I was in my mid 30s. But that ended up being a cold case, although we would talk about it from time to time at the precinct. Back when I was starting out, I had received a case that 5 children in different neighborhoods had gone missing without any sign of leaving or struggle. The thing they had in common was that all of them had a VHS playing in the TV at the time. However, unfortunately, the tape were mysteriously blank when submitted into evidence, so all we could do was just chalk it up to coincidence. I remember that day. I had a small bit of time to kill, and that's when I remembered it was a yearly yard sale nearby. There was a family on the next block over from me that did this on the exact same day every year. After a few minutes of checking what was available, my eyes landed on a particular VHS tape. In thick, squiggly letters, I read, "The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald. Weekend at Ronald's." I hadn't heard of this VHS tape before. I thought it was rare. So naturally, I was practically ecstatic about the find. I was grabbing at my wallet to snap it up within seconds. From what I could understand, there had been 7 of these tapes in total, all centered around a titular Ronald McDonald and all of his friends in the McDonald land. The group consisted of Ronald, Birdie the early bird, Grimace, Sunday the dog, and the Hamburglar. and two kids called Tika and Franklin.
Take it. It's free.
I jolted back as an old woman appeared from seemingly nowhere behind the other side of the table. The video seemed like it might be a fun, light-hearted watch while drunk. Why not spend 40 or so minutes watching whimsical, brainless content? Sure, I'll take it, I responded. I reached out to take it, and she quickly grabs my wrist, near bone breaking for an old woman.
Oh, when you see it, it sees you.
I looked at her and felt like there was nothing behind her eyes, maybe Alzheimer's or something. Honestly, this strange encounter made me want to watch the tape even more. Once I reached home, I got out the VCR, which I'll admit hadn't been touched in some time. The tape began with nothing really interesting happening in the live action segment, just regular kids show stuff. Ronald McDonald goofing off and the like. However, the animated segment is where the things got a little bit more interesting. Ronald and the gang had been invited to a Halloween party in a mansion and just had to get there. But the thing was, the mansion was so big they didn't know which room the party was being held in. Poor Birdie had become so terrified they wouldn't make it that she popped out 3 eggs, all of which came out with screaming, pulsating baby birds. It was just the kind of weird stuff I was looking for. I was having a bit of fun with the musical numbers even. It was just the kind of weird stuff I was looking for. I was having a bit of fun with the musical numbers even. That all changed about 10 minutes in, though. Members of the gang had started going missing one by one, and only Ronald was left standing as Ronald creaked his way down the crumbling stairs, with his eyes being the only indicator of him moving. He flicked on the light and let out a scream, which sounded like it came from a wild animal. Then the scream turned to laughter, maniacal laughter. It was the missing kids who disappeared all those years before, but at the time everything was different about them. To this day, I can remember the grotesque details of how they looked. The kids were dressed as the McDonald Land gang. Hamburglars mouth looked as if every tooth, save for one, had been forcefully torn out his head, blood cascading down his print striped suit. Grimace was nowhere to be seen. Grimace was nowhere to be seen, but I didn't dare question where he was. The children, Tika and Franklin, was also nowhere to be found. But then again, they hadn't been seen much in the whole episode. Sunday the dog was Rapsy, heavy-breathing monster, his face covered by his fur. I wouldn't have even known it was him if not for his brick red hair. And Birdie had what I hoped to God to be ketchup on her bib, her wings looking like mango limbs, what sounded like a dozen pops and cracks emanating each time she moved. What looked to be a beak was crudely stitched on her face, threatening to break off easily. Meanwhile, the McNugget buddies barely looked like their cartoon counterparts. Where there would be crispy, flaky batter, they were just covered from head to toe in blisters. I felt nauseous. What had they done with these kids? The audio and video started to break up, but something was crystal clear. The gang, they just stood there smiling at the viewer, somehow seeming to smile at me. And then Ronald began edging closer and closer until I could see his seemingly mascara ridden eyes boring into mine. A distorted voice said, "There's always room for one more in McDonald's land." The TV cut black, and without warning, a pale white hand attached to a red and white striped sleeve shot out of the television along with the tops of Ronald's head peering along with pieces of broken glass stuck into it. He moved faster than I expected and grabbed my ankle. He started dragging me be- He started dragging me in. Behind him, I could see typical McDonald's mascot holding the kids by the shoulders, all of them laughing in a gigantic grin. However, in all the kids' eyes, I could see was pain and fear. Get away from me! I screamed, kicking the clown hard in the face. You're going to join us all in here eventually. Ronald laughed, bleeding from his face. And then, with several clicks from his irregular contorted bones, he clawed backwards into the TV. It was over, or so I thought. For months after, I was constantly plagued with nightmares. These nightmares would have me stuck in a hellish version of Ronald McDonald's house. They would be a distorted, defaming version of the show theme song, as if it was being played on a broken tape or vinyl. During these dreams, I would be chased by one of the nightmarish mascot of the McDonald gang. Each time one would find me, they would stop dead in their tracks, grin, and hold up a different number, each counting down to something. 10, then 9, then 8, and so on. Each character had their own creative way of disposing of me. Ronald would maniacally bash my brains in, Sunday would maul and mangle me, or McNugget buddies would all jump into my stomach and begin piercing my flesh with their little beaks, until it all ended one day and I woke up in a hospital. And it would turn out Ronald McDonald had knocked me unconscious and the nightmares had put me in a coma. A concerned colleague stopped by my house after not hearing from me for a while and had found me unconscious next to the coffee table. Needless to say, I was in a very bad condition. I'm on my journey towards healing now, and I have not been plagued with any nightmares since. However, there's still one thing that worries me. What were they counting down to? Was it a countdown until the end of my coma? Or was it a reminder that one day I would eventually cross over into their world? I guess only time will tell. Well, then, I just want to say thank you to all of the stories that I was able to read from Reddit and all the people that let me a chance to narrate today. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment to help me give you better content. So, thank you. Have a nice night and a good fright.